Hey Rebecca, how was the NB panel?
Lawrence, it was an amazing experience. I'm not sure what I was expecting it to be. I knew we were going to be covering some heavy topics, some things that are kind of hard to hear and maybe not always rose colored. Um, but I'm really glad that we got a lot of joyful moments in it too.
You mentioned the entire conversation went way over. What were maybe some of the moments or the one moment that surprised you?
I guess the biggest surprise for me is the fact that I even opened up at a moment, and we were kind of on the tail end of time for sure. And I wanted to make sure to read an email message from one of our members that was pointed to Jen specifically. And uh, in reading that to Jen, I kind of had another self realization moment about body image and identity. And we ended up having a decent conversation about that and kind of realizing that no matter who you are, whatever the other two people on that panel with me might be more what I see as the idealized version of a non binary androgynous person, but they feel different ways about their own bodies too. And I think it was just a really powerful moment. I was kind of surprised that I went there, but I'm glad that I went there, and hopefully it helps other people.
So after you had the interview, you, Jin, and MJ are on like a text chat now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is it because Jin doesn't have a group of friends or like a colleagues or anything that they could talk openly to about this, or is it was there like another reason why you instantly formed this text chat?
I I think Jen has friends. Jen has a partner. Jen has colleagues. But I think the difference was that, and this is a good learn in general for embracing mental health for people. Um, I think that the trust was established really quickly through the interview that MJ and I are both safe people, and it's a safe space to be real and be authentic and not have to turn an identity on or off. We were very clear about the fact that Jen's allowed to be mad about things. I think this is something that was more stated in the group text than is in the interview, but I think it's a very important thing, which is MJ was talking about those of us that were socialized as women, more so than men, were taught to not have those strong anger emotions or strong emotions really at all. I guess men more so on the don't be sad, and women more on the don't ever get mad about anything. And I think we established a space with Jen where they felt that it was okay and it was safe to say the things that they want to say and not have to present it in a different way or a friendlier way or a softer, easier to hear sort of way. I think that's what we did, and therefore why Jen just like immediately after the interview was like, "Can we keep talking?" Like that's what it was. Yeah. But without further ado, please enjoy this interview. We had an amazing time and an amazing conversation, and I hope that all of you get something out of it.
Hello, companions!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Non-Binary Experience. This event is part of an ongoing series called Embracing Mental Health as a Fandom, and that embracing extends to everyone in the LGBTQIA2S plus community. We're here to celebrate the non-binary experience and to acknowledge the struggles that come with it. If you're watching us, you likely know our first guest from their performance as Ensign Esmar on Star Trek Picard, but they are definitely a person of many hats, as we'll find out today. Please welcome Jen Maley. Hi, Jen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Maddox Julien Slide has almost 15 years of film experience under their belt, including producing, first ADing, and screenwriting. They're the joint recipient of the 2020 New Orleans Film Festival South Pitch Grant Award, alongside their creative partner, Rebecca Isbell Davis, for their Southern Black queer sci-fi feature film E is For. They recently played a supporting role in Michelle Iantuano's award-winning feature film Live Screamers as hardline gamer Dice Grinter.
Howdy.
How are you doing today?
Doing all right. It is definitely a lot less hot than it has been. So I am in the dungeon of my co-op. Sorry, that sounded like, okay, dungeon, it's the basement. It looks like I'm doing a great job here, really just leaning into it.
Now, before we even start to talk about ourselves, we have quite a few folks out there who really would like a decent explanation of what non-binary is. Many of our members at the Companion are also not native English speakers, so grammar is already a bit difficult for them, and English as a second language. I have my own definition that I used recently with one of our members, Sophie, who was brave enough to message me and ask me what it all meant. But I would like to hear from the two of you. So if somebody asks you what is non-binary, what are your answers?
I'm waiting for MJ to speak first.
I think for me, language is so much fun, half because it's never enough. And it's always like one of the beautiful things about language is that it creates, one would hope, it creates like sort of an insatiable curiosity to continue to like learn and grow and search for the words that like you want to use to be able to express what you're feeling inside. So as far as non-binary, for me, it changes. But sort of the baseline is I looked at the two primary options, which are binary genders, and I was like, I don't feel like either of those things. And not in a those things are bad. It's just like that doesn't feel right. And I think it was more of a like, because non-binary, depending on who you are, falls under the trans umbrella. And a lot of folks think that the trans experience is primarily binary. And I'm not trying to invalidate any of that experience at all. I think non-binary for me is more like, it's more of a feeling than something that I can actually, it's like being okay in the question mark and like almost the question mark, the contradiction and the tension of my lived experience, and trying to find something that sort of umbrellas that, that allows for that exploration, for that sort of, for that seeking.
Exactly what MJ said, and I passed. No, I'm just kidding. That was great. That was really great. And I feel similarly. I think the best way that I could explain it to somebody who is not themselves non-binary and who doesn't understand, perhaps, is if you've ever had a persistent question in your mind of whether you were a man or a woman, that experience is a non-binary experience. I mean, you don't have to use those terms, but I guess what I'm saying is, if that's not been a persistent question for you, then let me put it the other way. If it's a persistent question for you, you're falling under the non-binary or the trans sort of realm. And people who are cis don't have that persistent question. It's just, well, of course I'm a man, or of course I'm a woman. There's no question there. So I guess to follow up on what MJ was saying, it's non-binary is living with that question mark and not feeling like you fit into one or the other category, and you don't want to fit into one or the other category. It is difficult to explain to someone who's never had that question. So I think to some extent, some trust is required on the part of people who are cis that, I've never questioned my gender, but clearly a lot of people do. So they're having an experience I can't necessarily relate to, but I trust that this is a human experience people have been having for a long time. And these people are asking to perhaps use different pronouns or have their gender acknowledged in a certain way. And just as we all have different names, I can respect their different pronouns or however they present themselves, just the way I would respect anything else about them.
I know the three of us all have different journeys and different moments where we, came to that, like, some sort of self-realization. So I'd love to hear it. So Jen, can you tell us about yours?
I am biracial. I also, yes, MJ.
Same.
I've always been a nerd. My mom was a lawyer and my dad was a bartender. So I've always never fit into one or another category. I went to Catholic school. I was the only Asian kid there. I went to my cousin's Korean church. I was the only really non-fully Korean kid there. So I've never really felt like I fit into a box. And then on top of that, I also never felt comfortable in my gender. And I frequently, or my sexuality, I frequently was attracted to other women, but also men. I didn't feel totally comfortable in my body. I often fantasized about having male body parts and just walking around in the world as a man. But I also didn't feel the need to transition and identify as a man. So I've always felt in between. But because I'm a people pleaser, I went along and presented as very feminine and all those sorts of things. And it wasn't until I got into a healthy relationship with a cis white man who's very much a nonconformist, not in gender ways, but otherwise has the spirit of a nonconformist in so many ways. And so I sort of have grown more into myself through this relationship, and it made me realize that I am pan and non-binary. I just, through the safe container of a safe relationship, I was able to fully become myself, which was kind of funny because it also, for a moment there, it kind of threatened the relationship. When I wasn't sure how far I wanted to go, if I wanted to medically transition. And he's very supportive, but also entitled to, be with someone that he feels physically aligned with.
Yeah, no, I think I was just listening and I was like, yep. That too. I'm also biracial. I was adopted. My family's predominantly white. I have two other Black adopted siblings, and grew up in the South in an incredibly conservative family who had some very specific ideas about presentation of gender. So I'm one of nine, and younger, of the sort of younger end of the thing. And there were just a lot of us. And the only way that I really got to get any alone time was either I would just run off to the woods and then I would also lose myself in books. Because I think it was this feeling of, knowing from the jump that you're the family that surrounds you, there's a disconnect. There's a way that you are moving through the world that they do not understand. But I fell in love with science fiction really, really early. I think one of the books that really sticks in my head, and me and Rebecca have talked about this before, where it was just I fell in love with A Wrinkle in Time. Because the main character is so messy and so imperfect. And it's her anger and her flaws and all of these other things that are her strong suits, the way that she holds the rest of the group together. I think that it showed me the way that, specifically with words, how somebody can be transported and see themselves in something and be able to move through feelings that they don't even have a vocabulary for yet. Because I think we also, a lot of times, we don't have the vocabulary to recognize that sexuality and gender identity are two different things. Yeah. And even gender expression isn't another layer to that. So similar to you, actually, it wasn't until I was in a partnership with a cis person, like a cis woman, and where was like, oh, huh, I wonder. And I think it was I think similar to your story, I think it was because of the like affirming and caring nature of that relationship that gave us like the ability to feel those things and to look at those things, where we didn't have to be so self-protective or maybe even scared about the parts that we didn't understand about ourselves, that like there was somebody else who was willing to help us hold those things so that we could explore them. My partner at the time, I was sort of just like, I think they them is where I'm going. And they're like, well, do you feel like the need to medically transition? And I was like, no, I'm actually I'm pretty pleased with my body. I get mostly annoyed by how other people perceive my body, but like I don't feel any kind of way about this. What everybody else sometimes puts on this is the thing.
Sorry.
Excellent.
Jen, I have a message from another member of ours named Freddie. Thank you so much for being visibly non-binary in the world. There's a frustration that comes with being seen as something you aren't because the body doesn't match the mind. And some days are a struggle. So it's incredibly important for those of us who do struggle to see we aren't alone. I would personally like to add to that in a sort of seeing something that you people seeing you as something that you aren't sort of mindset. I've had this conversation on podcasts before, and I've had this conversation with MJ before, which is me specifically as a non-binary person who is on the curvier side of things. It is much harder. It's so interesting because I feel myself getting emotional every time I talk about this, like literally every time. I think for a while, I didn't accept who I was or what I was because I felt like I didn't fit that picture. Oh, well, I don't fit what I think I'm supposed to be or what I think I am, so I'm just going to stay away from that thing because clearly I don't fit there. So it is very important for all of us to be, I think, open and seen, so that hopefully other people understand that there is that infinite combinations and infinite diversity going on even within the trans and non-binary world.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I have major body image stuff with feeling like I need to be thin, and a lot of it is gender related because the curvier I feel, the more it's weird. I actually feel fine with it, but I'm afraid of being perceived as more feminine if I have more curves. So I just thank you so much for saying that. It means a lot. And yeah,
I think it's not said enough. I think when you
really isn't.
And like, no shade, MJ, you know I love you, but like I feel like I look at MJ and MJ's like the like textbook androgynous non-binary person that we know and love. I'm serious. Like,
yeah,
I think that's fascinating because I don't like
but this is every
yeah, I think this is the thing. When you
thing.
say it out loud,
Yep.
it's like, oh, what are we doing?
Yep.
Like, because like I was joking around, I was like, I don't have body dysmorphia, I have body befuddlement. I'm like, my body is like, I don't understand where these hips came from. I didn't have them for the first 26 years of my life. And then they showed up. And I'm like, I'm okay with this, but I don't like the way that other people see this. I might look like the definition of non-androgynous, non-binary.
Mostly a joke, but it's
no. But like, I always see white people who are like the ultra androgynous, like the like Scandinavian model kind of like, and I'm over here just being like, that's
what you
actually
see. Yeah.
that's actually non-binary. And yeah, so I think it's just like we've got this whole perception spectrum that we're all playing in.
I'm tired of beating around it and like not talking about it because we're in a
Yeah,
world
I
of
mean,
like
we talk
trying to
about
be
it in
body
years 4.
positivity for everybody, right? And that like, but then you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally body positive for everybody except myself, and this is why, and you know, like,
Let's just play. Like I think the problem is it's so hard because there are such material consequences to perception. But if it was just like we just could play with our concepts of gender and how we express those things and move through the world without being punished for it, I think we would all like, we wouldn't have to spend so much time wondering if we were like the right personification of the thing. So I'm at a coffee shop, and it's closing time. And I'm not sure if I'm talking to myself or if I'm talking to myself. Excuse me.
Holy shit, Eleanor!
Yeah, I go by E now.
Do you want to sit?
My name is Eleanor Juliet Marks, just your average 28-year-old woman who drinks too much coffee and probably hates herself.
I know it sounds like a lot, but some weird shit started happening. I just started hearing this voice. They're me. Parallel universe me.
Pity.
I know shit's really hard right now, but that isn't now.
I do appreciate that you assume I have friends.
Wait, no ride or dies?
I'll be fine. I'll figure it out.
We're not really supposed to try to do this thing called life solo. It's a completely different person in a different timeline, like quantum physics different timeline. It bled.
All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change.
my journey is interesting in that it involves MJ. Well, not directly. There actually, I was the last person to realize who I was. So if basically, you know, growing up in the 80s and 90s, the term tomboy was just something that was just like, oh, I'm a tomboy, clearly. I don't like being super feminine, clearly. And I went through periods of time where I did try to be like hyper feminine. And like, I look back at those pictures now and I'm like, you look so uncomfortable. You look like just so uncomfortable. And it wasn't until, it wasn't until we made our feature film together in 2020. And I directed the whole damn thing and we finished it and I went, huh. Yeah, about all of that, because the whole point of the feature film is identity and the same character being in two different places about their identity via a sci-fi mechanism that made me go, oh yeah, I definitely, this fits way better than like being a tomboy ever did, you know, like it's just made it so much more comfortable and just made me so much more confident in who I was. And I didn't even like really care so much about pronouns at first or anything. And now I am a little more like I've officially said I'd really like they, them pronouns, because the she, her just like grates on me more and more every day. I feel like once you start realizing that and you start accepting it, then you're just like, nope, that is definitely not for me. And I don't want it anymore. But no, everybody from my past, like people from college and everything that I've told this to, they're like, yeah, And like there was no question from anybody else. It was just me. But no, I'm very thankful, and I think that shows you like the power of stories like MJ, like you're talking about, but art and stories and sci-fi and everything, in helping you work through, your own self-realizations. It was just an incredible way to realize that.
When you told me, I was like, well, yes.
Like everybody.
I mean,
yeah.
you did the same thing when I came out. When I came out as queer, you were like, yeah. Honey, everyone knew. We were like, cool. But I think that the idea, specifically like with the story, as far as the two narratives and understanding, like creating a new relationship with time, because you were like, everybody else knew, but you were on a different timeline. Like the journey took a minute, and like the things that you needed to experience, and like so much of the story of the feature that we made is about these characters being at two different, like they're in two separate timelines, and while they may be going through the same motions, like the level of lived experience and people who are in their life are affecting the way that they see themselves and how much they've been able to process. And also we say very clearly sort of in the film where it's like the goal isn't for the two characters to end up at the same place. It's to end up wherever feels truest to them. And like, I think a lot with a lot of queer narratives, there needs to be more room for it to, like, I think people want it to be very definitive, and it can be, but it also like it's okay if that changes. Life is already really hard. So like when people are willing to, I think a lot of times with cis folks, they think gender is because they have never had to decide what their gender is, or that is not the persistent question for them. They think it's a default rather than a thing that they're allowed to explore and examine and try on or take off, or like, yeah. And it is more of the like, so they feel like it's an inconvenience to a certain extent because they've never sort of jumped into the gender pool and swam around, like swam is the word. Not swam. That sounds wrong. Swam.
Don't come at us, grammar people. Don't come at us, grammar people.
Yeah, the metaphor is falling apart. We use they, them pronouns. So, like, we know nothing of grammar.
No. I'm going to swing the conversation a little bit. And Jen, this is the question that you're like, oh, we're going to go there with this. And I definitely am going to go there. But it's how, Jen, it's how Jen and I really met in Philadelphia. And they told me about an interaction they had with somebody who asked a question on the panel. The question that was asked to you and kind of what kicked everything off was, where do you see the future of non-binary people in the industry?
Yeah, I don't remember what exactly I said, but I remember giving an answer that was not in the hopeful vein that I felt like was expected. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if y'all relate to this with being non-binary. I think there's a certain, there's a personality aspect too of just nonconformity. And I feel like I'm very aware of when there are certain expectations being placed on me in an environment. And in the Star Trek fandom, there's understandably, there is this sort of, we are hopeful, we believe in the future, that diversity and that everything's going to be great in the future. I hate to say it, but I don't know that I believe that. I don't know that I believe it's going to be all bad either. I feel a little bit detached from whatever outcome it will be, and I don't feel that it's my place or my own awareness to even know what the future will hold. What I do know is my ability to wait around and stay in the industry until it changes enough for me to be a more significant part of it. There's a time limit there for me. I don't know what the time limit is. I feel very fortunate to have portrayed Esmar. I'm also portraying a non-binary character in a video game that's coming out this fall. So, you know, some good stuff has happened.
Yeah, I feel the the heavy divestment from the things that that we were told that we're going to solve the problems if we just dug our feet in, tried a little harder.
Yes.
And stuck it through. And it's just sort of like, I'm not interested in making myself small until somebody else is willing to accept it.
Bam! Okay, can you just be my spokesperson? That's what I should have said. That's a way more articulate way of putting it. That's exactly right.
This is why we like having MJ around.
Yes.
And it's just one of these things where it's like, I don't know, it's like going back to a bad boyfriend, being like, maybe if I just try a little bit harder and give him better words, like he'll start to care about me. And it's like, no, they're not going to care about you, because ultimately speaking, also, surprise, surprise, they don't care about us if it's not making them money.
Yes.
And it's ultimately speaking where it's just like, representation cannot save us if it's not based on telling good stories, if it's based on setting up the next thing for the next thing in order to create an endless quote unquote cinematic universe, etc., to just continue to make properties. And it's like, well, you're eating yourself. And I don't want to be a side dish. Like, I have no interest. That's cannibalization. Fuck you.
Yes. I think that what I've realized is, it's interesting that story has been brought up, because, and it's interesting that I haven't mentioned it, because for me, I started playing classical piano. And then I got into acting. And so for me, my creativity has always been heavily about being in the moment and feeling out the moment. And as for acting, that's in service of the story. For piano, it's in service of the piece. So there is a story and a piece as well. But it's very like an embodied experience for me. And so what I've realized is, embodied practices like yoga, which have always been very important to me, maybe I'm interested in teaching that. And so I've started doing that. I also love teaching in general. It feels very embodied for me to be able to be present with someone's learning process and sort of, especially obviously if you're teaching something like yoga, but I taught acting and movement and voice for many years. And it was similar of just sort of listening and responding sensitively to someone's body and like guiding them in certain ways to more wholeness. So yeah, I've been playing with that, and we'll see where that goes in terms of long term. I'm at a weird transition point where I don't know if this means leaving the industry or if this is just like a thing that I'm doing.
I had a bit of a, this was a dark night of the soul in March, April, because I was like, with the ethics that I have and the way that I want to move through the world and care for people on set, I can't spin up even a short film for less than probably 25-30K. And that's for a 3 to 4 day shoot. And that's might not even be post-production. That would probably be me handling a post or calling in some favors or that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, well, if this is the medium that you've been in love with since you were 12, where do you go from here? And I looked around and I was like, well, why do you tell stories? And I was like, well, because I wanted to find my people. And I found some of my people through stories. I found Rebecca, and I found so many of some of my closest friends now in real life are people that I met because we made movies together. But I looked at the stories I was telling and I was like, oh, it's a bunch of misfit weirdos who live together in kind of a dystopian society who are just trying to care for each other. And I was like, you wrote your life. You wrote what you live now. You live in Detroit, which is like one of the most cyberpunk cities in the world. You live in a housing cooperative full of a bunch of weird queer people. You grow your own food, and like it's one of these like and you like stories. So I talk about embodiment, and it's like and timelines and this whole journey that we've all been on to see how all of these pieces have come together, and it was just like so cool to have that, like all of those things that felt like failures or felt like things that sort of like beaten me into the ground, having to learn it the hard way, have really come together to embody this sense of alignment and wholeness. So like I want to keep telling stories that put me towards wholeness, and that's like connecting with the more than human world. I do a lot of gardening. There's a lot. Foraging, mutual aid, just different ways to continue to connect and build this ecosystem. And I think it's just fascinating to be like, you wrote all of these stories as a kid and as a young person about like community taking care of each other, and now you just kind of get to like live that as your real life. And it's like, oh, cool.
I do have an audio question that somebody recorded and sent in. It's a bit industry specific, but I do think it's a good thing to play after this conversation, because as much as we're saying what we're saying about the industry and like choosing whether to stay in it, to get out of it, to make your own way in a different way, there are people that are watching or that will be watching and listening that are still very interested in getting involved.
Totally.
And I like the way this question is posed, because it's asking more for advice in kind of more of a mental health capacity. And I think that's kind of bringing it back to how you can protect yourself if you're trying to be in the industry and do all of these really stressful things that you have to do.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm a college student, and I'm majoring in theater and specializing in acting. And so my question is about the audition process, and specifically, do you have any grounding exercise or anything that you do before going into an audition to calm yourself down or hype yourself up? Thank you.
Laura, I love this question. This is why because I have bipolar and anxiety. So this is part of why I'm so into yoga and meditation, because these embodied practices really do help. And I find that really breathing and feeling the sensation of breath in a place in my body where it feels safe, which for some people, tip of the nose. Generally, the chest is not great if you're feeling anxious, because we tend to breathe very high when we're anxious. So another place you can try is your low belly. I know also putting your hands on your body can also be very grounding, even something like this or like this. Just sort of touching your body and feeling your breath and letting your breath be low is helpful. I also feel like, I know we were talking sort of about calming down, but I think this relates to it, which is the more I can actually be in the headspace of the character and the story, the less anxious I feel, because I'm not thinking about, when we're anxious, we're thinking about trying to impress or trying to get the job, which is not the right mind frame for performance. So getting into the mode of like the imaginary world of the character, how does the character see this waiting room? Like being in the mode of seeing the world and experiencing the world through the eyes of the character, maybe even closing your eyes and running through some memories that the character might have experienced before the scene. Getting into the world of the character, creating that little aura for yourself, gets me out of my anxiety. So I guess I just shared like both a physical and a mental component to preparation.
Hopping on set as a director for the first time was the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life, but I would say the same thing, people have the same experiences, like in other situations in their jobs or in their, I don't know, having to come out to people. And like, there's all these places in your life where this advice could be very, very helpful to people, I think. Jessi Briggs, she, her, is a mental health and disability advocate, drag king, and Reading Pride Ambassador 2024. Jay Maslowki, they, them, is Miss Gettysburg's Teen 2024 and the first openly non-binary teen candidate in the Miss Pennsylvania system. They are treasurer of their high school's, is it Saga or SAGA?
Yes.
It's Saga Club, and active in their school and community theaters. Please welcome Jessi and Jay. Hi.
Hi.
So Jen and I met you, Jessi, at Galactic D&I-Con in Philadelphia this past April. And Jen, you made it a point to suggest that we actually bring Jessi and Jay in for this chat. So that was all on you. So what struck you about them when you met Jessi in April and wanted to, decided you wanted to bring them in on this conversation?
Yeah, well, I could just tell they had a strong commitment to the fandom and the community and service to the community and just this deep investment. And that always resonates with me. And yeah, we just had a very real conversation and it was great. And then they wanted to introduce me to Jay and we had a nice little back and forth. And I just thought they would be a great person to bring in to have this conversation with you. So thank you for bringing us all together.
Jay, tell me what it's been like, your non-binary journey.
It's been difficult. I've done pageants pretty much my whole life, from the time I was like 2. And about 2020, I was really struggling with figuring out like my gender identity and what identified exactly. And so I realized that I was non-binary, and I took a long break from pageants because they're very feminine, and it's like, how am I supposed to represent as feminine when I use they, them pronouns and not she, her? And then a couple years ago, my mom met A.K. Hazel, who is Miss Greater Reading 2024, and they are the first openly Miss candidate to compete in the Miss Pennsylvania system. So they just really inspired me to get back into pageants.
I think from a mom's perspective with Jay, I think Jay having a role model and Jay seeing Jen on TV and and seeing, that there are non-binary people out there too. But that helped Jay. I noticed that every single teen that was in the competition with them was respectful of their pronouns. Mm-hmm. Nobody expected Jay to act as anything other than who they were.
It feels like what you're saying is that the pageant system that you're in, we hear stories all the time of anti-trans, non-binary people when it comes to sports. But it feels like what you're saying, at least in your specific system that's there, that it's way more, I guess, way more supportive than I even thought it would be.
In this state.
Yeah, in this state. The Miss America organization itself is getting better and more progressive very, very slowly.
Mm-hmm. And there are other systems as well that are opening the doors up to, trans and non-binary folks. But there's still a lot of bigotry. For instance, Miss Maryland USA was recently crowned, and she is a trans woman, and just don't go in the comment section. It's really disheartening. And I try my best to protect Jay, because even Jay, as a teenager, as a child, we've posted things about them like, oh, this is, look at what Jay's doing in the community. Look at what Jay has done for Gettysburg. And there have been horrible things said in the comments. And I try to jump on it as quickly as I can, and I delete and I block. But
how do you, or how would you suggest people go about protecting themselves? Or and this is for you, Jen, too, protecting yourself physically by saying, hey, I'm blocking this person or whatever, but also doing what you can for yourself internally and mentally to get yourself through that.
I am I'm logged into all of Jay's social media accounts. So even though they're 17 and they're very intelligent and they can handle making their own social media posts, I'm logged in to their accounts so that I can kind of be that extra set of eyes. If I see someone starting to be rude or any comments, I'm able to get in there fairly quickly and block.
Mhm.
You know, I know that that's not feasible for all parents, and maybe not all kiddos want parents logged into their stuff. But the pages that I'm logged in for Jay are for their Miss Gettysburg title page and for their drag. So it's more for their public persona pages.
I just want to say, like, Mom of the Year award goes to Jessi. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
I have a story for you from one of our members. Her name is Nicole. She's a teacher. So there was this girl, Emily, who told me in class she was non-binary and would like to be called by another name. I replied, "Okay, how do you want me to call you?" And they said, "Is it really that simple?" And so I wanted to go from that story into Jay, if you're okay with it, telling us about some of your school experiences, and what you've been through in school, being out as a non-binary person.
When I discovered I was non-binary, at the time I was at a self-led learning school, and I was already out as pan. Like, we had adults there, and so they were teachers, but they also mentored the students. So I told them, I was like, "Hey, I'm non-binary. I use they pronouns now," and they instantly were like, "Okay, like, we can start to work on that and make sure your pronouns are used correctly." And then when I transferred to my current high school, I let my counselor know, I let my teachers know, and they immediately were like, "Okay, like, we can do that." Unfortunately, with the students, that is another story because kids are just very, very judgmental. And
Mm.
thankfully, I'm lucky enough to have friends who are very respectful of my pronouns and the fact that I'm non-binary, but there are some kids at my school who are very transphobic and homophobic, and it's really disheartening to see that because usually kids learn it from parents. So
I am not a parent. Let me put this out there right now. But my co-host Christina on my podcast is, and she is the parent to a trans child herself. So this question comes from her, really. She says, I do think there's nuance when it comes to parenting of a trans or non-binary children in regards to whether the parent is or isn't part of the queer community. And she says, I know quite a few parents who are non-queer who have queer children, and they struggle with a kind of imposter syndrome or the idea of fake allyship because they feel like they don't quite fit. And I know you said that wasn't your specific journey, but you do have some insight for us for that. So I would love to hear yours and your husband's insight as well.
For me, I'm a queer woman. I didn't come out until I was in my 30s, but I knew I was like 8 years old, and I was like, why am I getting butterflies in my stomach when I look at her, and when I look at him, and like, what's going on? I don't understand. But I kept that to myself for a very long time. Not because my parents aren't supportive, but just because the world isn't supportive. Um, so when Jay came out to me, I wasn't even out yet. And I thought, yeah, I'm here for you, whatever you need. When they came out as non-binary, I admittedly did not know that word. And I messed up pronouns so much for the first year or two. Now, when people mess up and call Jay she, her, it's weird, and I get defensive and upset. I'm like, hey, no, they, them, like, no, get it straight, not straight, gay.
Get it, gay.
But so it took me a little bit, and I think because I'm also a queer woman, and because I felt like I had to keep it to myself for so long, seeing Jay be able to be open about it, it's really inspiring. And I love them so much for their confidence, but I also, because I know how scared I was and I know what it's like to be in the world as a queer person, I want to like put my wings around them and just protect them a little bit more. My husband is not queer. He's a straight, cis, white, nerdy man. And so he said, his name's Chad. And he said, my experience has been interesting because I didn't come into Jay's life until they were 15, and I've only ever known them as being non-binary. I think having that experience, it's made a difference. It's made it different because Jessi has had to adjust to them being non-binary. That has helped give me a little bit of a different perspective, but also separates me from other parents as they have had to make the adjustment that I've never had to experience. There is definitely a feeling of imposter syndrome and disconnect. As a parent, we tend to be able to use our own experiences to guide and connect with our kids during tough times. Being a cis hetero parent to a non-binary child at times makes it hard because I have no frame of reference for some of Jay's struggles over identity and social issues. It creates this feeling of being insufficient as a parent or not good enough. Going to Pride events with my family and seeing Jay be able to lower their walls and be themselves has been helpful in realizing I don't have to know everything. It has helped with reducing my feelings of being a fake or ineffective ally to know that I don't have to have experienced everything to be present for my kids. Though I don't know Jay's struggles, I can always be there for them to help give them a space to go when things feel overwhelming. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a perfect parent, and I definitely make my share of mistakes and don't handle things the best all the time. But being able to be there for not just Jay, but my other kids who identify as queer has been a very rewarding experience and helped me to be a better ally, parent, and person.
What would you say to someone in your position that hasn't gotten as far down the road as you have? What would you say to maybe support them, maybe support their mental health, to help them out a little bit?
From a parent's perspective to other parents, if your child comes to you and says, I think I'm non-binary, or I am trans, or I'm gay, or I'm questioning, know that they trust you and feel safe enough with you and love you enough to be opening up about this. Use that knowledge to do everything that you can to give them that love back and to let them know that they were right to trust you, that they were right to think, I'm pretty sure my mom loves me enough that I can tell her that. Be there so that they know my mom does love me enough. My mom does want me to be safe, or my dad or my parent, they do want what's best for me.
You should always have a safe space, even if it's not your parents. Maybe if it's like an uncle or an aunt or a grandparent.
Or a teacher.
Yeah. Counselor. Just have a trusted adult that you feel safe telling to eventually help you get to the point of telling the parent.
How do you feel the Trek fandom has been for you in regards to accepting of queer people, and has it supported? How have you felt personally? Jen, Jay, Jessi. We've got a lot of J names today, I'm realizing.
It's a good letter.
So supportive. So ridiculously supportive. I never expected to be so embraced. I think we also underestimate, or at least I underestimated, how meaningful it would be to people to see a non-binary character that I portrayed. I didn't expect so many people to be so wow, that really was meaningful for me to see. I'm so grateful to be a part of it.
when I decided to compete in the Miss Pennsylvania system, I was like, I needed a community service initiative. And so Mom introduced me to Trek and the Vulcan philosophy, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And it's the belief that growth, beauty, and progress all come from the union of me and like. And so I was just very inspired by it, and I myself am very nerdy. So it works out perfectly because I'm all about diversity, because I feel like it's not talked about enough in media and it needs to be talked about more.
They've read books to Girl Scout troops, and they just started doing something called Fandom Friday on their Instagram, where they're interviewing other title holders and they're asking them, what is your favorite, fandom, and how has it positively impacted your mental health? To kind of find, because not everybody's going to be a Trekkie, and that's okay. We forgive them for that.
Thank you, Jay and Jessi, so much for stopping by and having a conversation with us. We'll make sure to let everybody know everything that you have going on, Jay, and everything that you're working towards. Hopefully we can help you get your message out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would love to go around and ask everybody on the spot, I know at this point, something that's bringing you joy, because there's so much in the world, internally and externally, that is bringing us a lot of trauma and strife right now. So, what's bringing you joy?
I've settled into a really fun morning ritual, because it gets really hot and humid here pretty quickly. So I'm up before the sunrise, and I just basically pull on clothes half asleep and then trudge out to the garden and just work in the garden for about an hour as the sun is rising, before I get my coffee, before anything. I don't check my phone or anything like that. The first thing on it's just gonna be you, the plants, the dirt, the sunrise, the other things that are happening there, and and it's super surprise. It's grounding. And that is bringing me a lot of joy. And I also have started working part-time at my favorite queer bookstore in the city. And they have this section of damaged books that they can't sell. So I'll just go raid that, and now I just get to give books to my friends that I think they would like from the damaged book section. And damaged is oh no, the cover is a little messed up.
I think community is giving me a lot of joy, and it's something that I've been craving for a long time, that I'm really intentionally cultivating at the yoga studio where I work. I also am very fortunate to have married into a family that's very tight knit, and there are a lot of a ton of older women. And just I'm really enjoying talking to old people. There's just an energy and a wisdom that comes from old people who have done some work also, of course.
I recently in Alaska was able to go sea kayaking for the first time, and I think it's going to become my whole personality.
Rebecca, if I as a fellow neurospicy person, I'm gonna tell you have one of these every 6 to 8 months.
Oh, I know. It's my hyperfixation.
Yeah, I was cool. This is the new special interest.
There's a whole section of dead hyperfixations. There's a pickleball racket underneath. Thank you, both of you, so much for being here and having this conversation. I hope that it will educate some people and make some other people feel like they're not alone. Do you have any final statements that you would like to make?
The world is very big and scary right now. But I actually believe that I don't think everything's going to get better, meaning all the problems are going to go away. But I do know that one of the solutions is finding your people and really caring. And that's messy and imperfect. But frankly speaking, it's kind of like one of the things that makes living dope. So if there are things that are pulling you away from those opportunities to really like dig in and find those people and to learn and grow and to be messy and imperfect and to transform, it's okay to deprioritize those things and to care for yourself and to care for your community. And because you're going to be sold a lot of things that your career is going to make your life better, or you are all of this money is going to make your life better. And while there are certain things that can very much be solved by money, that doesn't take care of our souls, but our community does.
Yeah, community was exactly what I was going to say too. I was actually going to say exactly everything that MJ said, exactly the way they said it. Actually, MJ just ripped me off.
Oh, we've got problems now.
Telepathically ripped me off. But yeah, I think one of the bright spots of these days is the internet, and it can be used for good, and it can be used for us to find our people. Mm-hmm. So find your people. If you're listening to this, obviously you found some people who are energetically supporting you on your journey of being yourself and letting yourself live your most authentic life. So yeah, just echoing what MJ said, find your people and to nurture your people.